What seemed to be the most promising of leads has been no help at all.
Forget the Horenberg knife. It's a dead end. Start over. Go back to the wreck. Find something else.
The more the divers learn about this wreck, the more enigmatic it becomes. Aside from its identity, one of the most puzzling questions is how it met its end. To find out more about what might have sunk the U-boat, John Chatterton shows a videotape of the damage to U.S. Navy underwater demolition experts.
And they looked at the damage to the wreck and they concluded that it didn't appear to them as though the damage was from depth charges.
According to the Navy, depth charges would not cause damage this severe. They suggest the boat was sunk by something more powerful than a depth charge, perhaps a torpedo. But whose torpedo? The records show the Allies never attacked a U-boat at this location. The divers are left to wonder if this boat was sunk by its own torpedo. Perhaps the U-boat spotted a ship, fired at it, only to have something go disastrously wrong.
If a steering motor stuck or a gyro tumbled or anything else, a natural hydrodynamic trajectory for the weapon is to go into a circle. So once you start a torpedo circling, you become the prime candidate to get hit by your own torpedo.
If a U-boat crew suspected their own torpedo was circling back, their only hope for escape would be an emergency dive. It begins with the order, alarm. To make an 1,100-ton boat vanish, a complex series of events must unfold with precise timing. In the diesel motor room, the crew shuts off the diesels and closes the air intakes. Now the electric motors take over. The commander gives the order, Fluten, flood the tanks. Valves are open, letting seawater into ballast tanks. Men who are not on duty run forward. Their weight helps point the boat down. The emergency dive is the most critical test a U-boat crew can face. Seconds mean life or death.
From the order alarm, it took 30 seconds. 30 seconds to disappear from the surface, and another 30 seconds to be on a depth of 60 meters. But it was only possible with a well-trained crew, of course. And 30 seconds can be a long time in war.
For the scuba diver, submerging is also complex. As with a U-boat, diving and surfacing require careful, precise timing. On Columbus Day weekend, 1992, the divers get a grim reminder of how unforgiving the process can be. A pair of experienced divers, Chris Rouse and his son, Chris Jr., are about to search the galley.
The plan was that the father would stay outside and Chrissy Jr. would swim in to the wreck.
Inside the wreck, something goes terribly wrong.
The son had gotten past the galley, struck something, and it fell on him. And he was in a cloud of silt he couldn't see and he couldn't move.
He remains trapped for nearly 30 minutes. Then his father goes in looking for him.
He managed to find the boy, extricated the kid, and they both exited the submarine.
But by now they are running out of air, and they cannot locate their spare tanks.
I think at this point, they were both panicking, they were both extremely low on air, and they made a decision. They just surfaced from 230 feet.
But a diver at 230 feet cannot just surface. Under pressure, his breathing forces more gas into his body than it can hold on the surface. At depth, his blood is now like the soda in an unopened bottle. If the pressure is suddenly lowered, gas that was dissolved now forces its way out of the liquid in the form of bubbles. To avoid bubbles forming in his blood, the diver must decompress, come up in stages, letting his body reduce the gas gradually.
The longer you stay down, the longer those stages are going to be. You come up to 110 feet, you have to wait for a minute, and so on and so forth, until you finally surface.
In their panic, the father and son come up without decompressing. Their bodies are still saturated with inert gas. No longer under pressure, this gas begins bubbling out of their blood.
The son could not use his legs, and we literally had to drag him up the ladder.
The father died at the back of the boat, but the last thing he did was tell us to take his son on board first.
Called the Coast Guard. They flew a helicopter out. We cut our anchor lines and started heading back in towards shore to meet the helicopter.
The son lived on the boat. He lived for a couple of hours in the helicopter, and he died in the recompression chamber in the hospital.
Three divers have now died on the U-boat. John Yerga is starting to wonder if the risk of continuing is simply too great.
When the father and son team died, I looked at those two guys and said, I don't know that I belong here. If these guys, knowing as much as they did, died diving this wreck, what am I doing going to these depths and making these kind of dives?
The following week, John and Richie go back to the wreck to shoot video and analyze what went wrong.
It was a very somber dive. To see their equipment strewn about the wreck with their name on it. They were good divers. And every dive I've made ever since then, that's in the back of my mind.
The tragedy brings another dive season to a close. Over the winter, the team will regroup.
It's not that we didn't think about that incident very seriously, but I don't think there was ever any consideration that maybe we should stop.
Three more years of diving and research follow. But still, the divers are no closer to finding the answer. Each has his own reason for continuing. For Richie, it is a sense of responsibility to the families of the lost crew.
It's not a personal challenge, it's more that I think I'm doing the right thing. I think that if we drop the ball on this and stop, it'll just stay the way it had been for 50 years. No one knew it was there, and not really anybody cared.
But for John Chatterton, it is the challenge of solving the mystery, finishing what he has begun.
I've corresponded with U-boat men, historians, authors. Nobody can tell me what boat this is. I don't want to give up, and the only other option is to carry it through to its conclusion.
Now, in the spring of 1997, John Chatterton comes up with a daring plan to get into the electric motor room where there may be boxes of spare parts that can identify the U-boat. John will remove all his tanks of gas except one. Pushing this single tank in front of him, he will squeeze his body through the narrow space above the oil tank. Once past the obstruction, he'll put his tank back on and proceed into the E-motor room. To Richie, it seems foolish.
It's not worth it to me. I'm not going to do that. It's too dangerous. I have kids. I don't think that it's a safe thing to do.
We have to figure out a way to get in there. Yeah, there's the potential for somebody getting hurt for pushing a little too hard. I'm not 100% sure I can make it. But there's also experience and skill and ability, and I rely on that. And then up and over the top of that.
Tomorrow morning, John Chatterton, with thousands of hours underwater, will make the most dangerous dive of his life. Morning arrives. The tension is palpable.
This is a very dangerous wreck. So far, 3 men have lost their lives. It's one thing if you're just going on a sightseeing dive. It's another thing if you're going to dive down to 230 feet and penetrate into this broken ship. It takes a lot. It really takes a lot. It takes a lot of nerve, and it also takes a lot of experience.
Richie, if it looks like I'm having trouble, you give me as much time as you think you can safely give me to let me work it out myself. Anything that's 3 taps, 3 tugs, or 3 punches means trouble. And we're out of there.
Got it.
Cool?
Yep.
Let's do it.
Hang on.
If John's plan works, he will soon enter a place unseen and untouched since the day the U-boat sank. With Richie's help, John secures his decompression gases and removes his single tank. With only 20 minutes of gas, John swims through the hatch into the diesel room. Richie follows. John squeezes over the collapsed oil tank. Once past the oil tank, he's on his own. He plans to be back in 10 minutes. John and Richie won't reappear on the surface for over an hour. As the minutes pass, the team can only wonder what's happening below. While waiting for John, Richie searches the diesel room for artifacts. It's been 10 minutes. Richie can see John's light faintly in the distance. He squeezes in for a closer look. Something isn't right. John's blue tank is visible, but he's not moving closer. Richie isn't sure what's happening, but there's nothing he can do to help. He has to start back. The divers on deck know John is running late, but they don't know why.
There was a problem with communications, and then he didn't come out, which to say made me a little apprehensive.
Finally, John appears.